They abandoned me and said that I was not their real father, so I gathered my things and left. I started driving trucks when I was 23, fresh-faced and full of ambition. Now, at 41, I had been on the road longer than I had ever stayed in one place. My life was simple, predictable, and exactly the way I wanted it. It was just me, the long stretches of highway, my dog Guest curled up in the passenger seat, and the quiet satisfaction of watching my savings grow, 1 mile at a time. When I first got into trucking, I didn't care much for the idea of working for someone else forever. My goal was always to own my own rig, to be my own boss, to decide my own routes without some office guy breathing down my neck. But buying a truck outright wasn't cheap, and I wasn't the kind of guy who took unnecessary risks. So, I played it smart. I lived frugally, stayed out of trouble, and put away every extra dollar I could. Guest had been with me for the last 6 years. I found him at a rest stop in Texas, a scrawny mutt sniffing around for scraps. He had these big brown eyes that made it impossible to leave him behind. I named him Guest because, at the time, I wasn't planning on keeping him. But he stayed, and soon, he was as much a part of my rig as the worn-out steering wheel. He never complained, never asked for anything more than food, a good scratch behind the ears, and the chance to stick his head out the window whenever we were cruising down an open stretch of road. Most people wouldn't call my life exciting, but I never needed excitement. I had the freedom of the road, a steady paycheck, and a dream that was getting closer every year. That was enough for me. I never had much reason to stop at pet stores, but Guest had chewed through his last toy, and I figured he deserved something new. It was one of those rare days when I wasn't on the road, just passing through town, stretching my legs before the next long haul. The place smelled like sawdust and hay, filled with the chatter of kids begging their parents for hamsters or fish. I was just about to grab a rubber bone when something small and fast slammed into my leg. I looked down to see a little boy, no older than 4 or 5, rubbing his head and blinking up at me with wide eyes. His blonde curls were a mess, and he wore a dinosaur t-shirt that was at least one size too big. He looked up, startled, then turned on his heel and bolted back toward the woman pushing a stroller a few aisles away. "Sorry about that," she said, her voice carrying the kind of exhaustion only a mother of 2 could have. She looked to be in her early 30s, dressed in jeans and a faded sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled into a quick ponytail. Her hands were full, one gripping the stroller and the other trying to rein in the bouncing little boy. "Liam, slow down. You can't run into people like that." "It's all right," I said, waving it off. I had been knocked into by worse things in my time. She gave me a polite smile before adjusting the baby in the stroller, a tiny thing, probably no older than a year. The name, Amy, was embroidered on the blanket wrapped around her, and she stirred slightly, making a soft noise before settling back to sleep. That was when I noticed the small badge pinned to the strap of the woman's bag. A golden star, the unmistakable symbol of a military widow. I had seen it before, back when I used to haul equipment for military bases. It meant that her husband had been killed in action. Afghanistan, most likely, given how many young men had been sent over and never come back. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. There wasn't anything I could say that would make a difference. Instead, I just gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement, one that she caught immediately. Her smile faltered, just for a second, and she looked away, pretending to focus on fixing the baby's blanket. "Come on, Liam," she said, her voice softer now. "Let's pick something out for Scout." The little boy grinned and grabbed a toy off the shelf, already moving on from our encounter. But as I watched them walk away, something about the way the woman carried herself stuck with me. The weight of loss clung to her, but so did the determination to keep going. I had spent years alone, by choice, but she hadn't been given one. That thought lingered with me as I paid for Guest's new toy and stepped back out onto the road. After that first meeting at the pet store, I started running into Mia and her kids more often. It wasn't intentional at first, just a coincidence, or so I told myself. But the next time I stopped by the park to let Guest stretch his legs, there they were, Liam chasing a soccer ball, while Mia sat on a bench, rocking Amy's stroller with one foot. Guest, who was usually indifferent to strangers, perked up the moment he saw Liam and trotted right over, as if he had known the kid his whole life. Liam was delighted, throwing his little arms around Guest's neck and laughing as my dog tolerated the rough affection with surprising patience. Amy, still too young to really understand what was happening, just stared wide-eyed from her stroller, occasionally reaching out toward Guest whenever he got close. Mia, on the other hand, was different. Guest was cautious around her, not in a hostile way, but in that instinctive way dogs sometimes are when they sense something unspoken. He would sit between me and the kids, but always keep one eye on her, as if waiting for some kind of signal. Mia noticed it too, and, with a small laugh, said, "I guess he's not sure about me yet. He's just not used to people outside the truck," I admitted, giving Guest a scratch behind the ears. But he'll come around. And he did, slowly. Over the next few weeks, I found myself making more stops in town, timing my breaks so they lined up with afternoons at the park or quick visits to the local diner, where Mia sometimes took the kids for lunch. It became routine. Liam running ahead, shouting Guest's name, Amy reaching out for him with chubby fingers, and Mia greeting me with that tired but genuine smile. I told myself I wasn't changing my routes on purpose, but I knew better. I started taking contracts that brought me through town more often, stretching my layovers just long enough to grab a coffee with Mia or take Guest on a walk where we might accidentally run into them. The kids adored him, and he, in turn, treated them like they were his own. One evening, after a long day on the road, I stopped by their place just as the sun was setting. Mia had invited me over for dinner. Not a big thing, just some leftovers and whatever she could throw together with two kids clinging to her. I sat on the porch, watching Liam run circles around the yard while Amy babbled happily in her high chair. Guest lay stretched out beside me, his head resting on his paws, completely at ease. Mia stepped outside with 2 cups of coffee and handed me one before sitting down beside me. She didn't say anything right away, just watched the kids with a quiet look that I was starting to recognize, something softer than exhaustion, something closer to peace. "You're around a lot these days," she finally said, not accusing, just observing. I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest before answering. "Yeah, I guess I am." She didn't push for more, and I was grateful for that. We just sat there, watching the sky turn orange and pink, the sound of Liam's laughter mixing with the distant hum of passing cars. For years, my life had been nothing but the road, my truck, and Guest. Now, without really meaning to, I had let something else in. Or maybe, I had finally found something worth slowing down for. It happened gradually, so slowly that I barely noticed the shift until I was already in the middle of it. At first, it was just little things, a bag of groceries left on Mia's porch when I knew she was running low, an extra box of diapers for Amy when I passed through town, a new pair of sneakers for Liam when I saw the ones he had been wearing were starting to fall apart. I never made a big deal out of it, and neither did she. She never asked for help, but she also never turned it down. She just gave me a quiet nod, sometimes a small smile, and that was enough for me. The kids, though, they started expecting me. Guest, and I weren't just visitors anymore. Liam would run to the door when he saw my truck pull up, shouting my name like I had been gone for months instead of just a week. Amy, still too young to say much, would lift her arms the moment she saw me, demanding to be carried. It wasn't something I had planned on, but I found myself adjusting without thinking, making space for them in ways I hadn't realized I was capable of. One evening, after a long haul, I stopped by their place just as Mia was putting the kids to bed. Liam was already in his pajamas, running around the living room with the kind of energy only a 5-year-old could have. I caught him mid-sprint, lifting him off the ground as he laughed and squirmed in my arms. "All right, kid, time for bed," I said, carrying him to his room while he kicked his feet in protest. As I tucked him in, he yawned, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Night, Dad," he mumbled, already halfway asleep before I had the chance to react. I sat there for a moment, staring at him, waiting for the weight of that word to fully settle. I wasn't his father, not by blood, not by any official title. But to him, it didn't seem to matter. Mia had been standing in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the whole thing unfold. She didn't say anything, just gave me a look that was part amusement, part something else, something I didn't have the words for yet. A year later, we got married. It wasn't a big wedding, just a small ceremony with a few close friends, Liam throwing flower petals down the aisle with more enthusiasm than precision, and Amy clapping every time someone laughed. Mia didn't take my last name, and I never expected her to. She had built her life piece by piece after losing her husband, and I wasn't there to replace him. I was just there to stand beside her, to be what she needed, what the kids needed, in whatever way I could. That night, as we sat on the porch after the guests had gone, Guest curled up at my feet, Mia resting her head against my shoulder, I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just passing through. I wasn't just a trucker on the road, living from one stop to the next. I had a home, a family, a reason to come back. And that, more than anything else, was what I had been searching for all along. At first, I didn't notice it. Or maybe I just didn't want to. Life had settled into a rhythm, one that I had convinced myself was the closest thing to happiness I had ever known. I still drove my routes, still spent long stretches of time on the road, but every mile now had a destination. Coming home meant something. It meant Liam's laughter as he ran to greet me, Amy's tiny arms reaching up for me, the warmth of a house that wasn't just a place to stop, but a place to belong. But there were things I had ignored, little things that should have meant more than I let them. Mia talked about her late husband often, which I understood. He was the father of her children, the man she had loved, the one she had built her first life with before it was ripped away from her. I never expected her to forget him, and I never wanted her to. I listened when she spoke about him, about the way he used to make her coffee just right, about how he had been the kind of man who could fix anything with his hands. I learned more about him than I ever learned about myself in her eyes. Because when she spoke of me, she never did it in the same way. At first, I thought it was just habit. She called me stepdad when talking to the teachers at Liam's school, made a point to clarify to new acquaintances that I was her second husband, not her first. When people asked about me, she would shrug and say something vague about how I was a trucker, as if that was all there was to me. My job, the thing I had built my life around, the thing that had brought me to her in the first place, was treated as something to be brushed aside, something unimportant. She never said anything cruel. She never spoke to me with anything but kindness. But there was a distance, a line I couldn't quite cross, no matter how much time passed. I was there, but I wasn't really there. I was a presence in her life, a necessity maybe, but not someone she saw the same way she had seen him. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that I was overthinking it, that what we had built was real, that the kids loved me, that Mia choosing to be with me meant something. I ignored the nagging doubt in the back of my mind, the feeling that maybe I was the one who had convinced himself this was a family when, to her, I was just the next chapter in a book she wished she hadn't been forced to continue. So I smiled. I helped with homework. I kissed her goodnight. I played the part one thought I was supposed to play, and I told myself it was enough. It happened slowly, in the way that all changes do. One day, Liam was still that bright-eyed kid running to me with open arms, and then, before I knew it, he wasn't. Amy, who used to cling to me like I was the safest thing in the world, started rolling her eyes when I asked her how her day was. It wasn't sudden, not really. It was small things at first, less enthusiasm when I came home, shorter conversations at dinner, the way they started looking past me instead of at me. At first, I chalked it up to growing up. Kids change. They find new interests, new friends, new reasons to pull away from their parents. I told myself it was normal, that it was just a phase, the kind of thing every family went through. But then came the words, the ones I should have been prepared for, but still hit harder than I expected. You're not our real father. Liam said it first, during a stupid argument over his grades. He was 13, full of attitude and fire, and I had made the mistake of trying to parent him like I had the right to. I told him he needed to take school seriously, that he wasn't a little kid anymore, that life wouldn't always be easy. He stared at me for a long second, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists, and then he said it. You're not my real dad. Stop acting like you are. I don't know what I expected to feel, but I wasn't ready for the way it knocked the air out of my lungs. I had heard those words before, in whispers, in passing moments, but never like that. Never with that much venom. I wanted to tell him that I never tried to replace his father, that I had only ever wanted to be there for him, that I had loved him from the moment he had called me dad, all those years ago. But I didn't say anything. I just stood there, letting the weight of his words settle in the space between us. Amy wasn't far behind. She was only 10, still young enough that I thought I had more time before she pulled away, but she must have been listening to Liam. She started saying it too, in softer ways, but with the same finality. Whenever I tried to help with something, whenever I gave her advice, whenever I tried to be what I had always been, you're not my real dad. I turned to Mia, expecting, hoping, that she would say something, that she would step in and remind them that I had been there for them their entire lives, that I had earned more than just the title of stepfather. But she never did. She would shake her head, sigh, and brush it off with a tired smile. It's just teenage angst, she would say. They don't mean it. But they did mean it. And the worst part was, I had started to believe it too. I don't know when I officially became an outsider in my own family. Maybe it had been happening for years, little by little, and I had been too blind to see it. Maybe I had convinced myself that love and effort were enough to earn a permanent place in their lives. But love alone doesn't hold people together. And effort only matters if the people you're fighting for want you there. It started with the small things, dinners I didn't know about until after they happened, plans that were made without so much as a mention to me. I would come home from a long haul to find out they had gone out to eat the night before, their laughter still lingering in the house, the scent of leftovers in the fridge, as if I had never been part of it to begin with. I shrugged it off the first few times. People get busy. They forget. It wasn't personal. Then it was Liam's school play. I had seen the flyer on the counter, a bright sheet of paper advertising a performance he had been excited about when he was younger. I had planned to be there. I had arranged my schedule so I could make it home in time. But when I showed up at the school, the seats were already filled, and my family was sitting together in the second row. Mia, Liam, Amy. Even Mia's parents had made it. I stood in the back, watching as my stepson took the stage, looking out into the crowd, smiling when he saw the people who mattered. People who weren't me. Thanksgiving came next. I had assumed, stupidly, blindly, that we would be spending it together. I had bought the turkey, stocked up on the ingredients for the stuffing Mia always made. But when I walked through the door that evening, the house was empty, the dinner table still spotless, untouched. I called Mia, my chest tightening, and when she finally picked up, she sounded distracted. "Oh, we're at my parents' place. I thought I told you." She hadn't. And when I checked my phone later, scrolling through pictures that had been posted online, there they all were. Laughing, eating, surrounded by warmth and family. A family that had stopped including me long ago. But the final blow, the one that knocked out whatever hope I had left, came years later when Amy got engaged. I had heard about it in passing, a mention from a distant relative, a casual remark that sent my heart plummeting. I hadn't been invited to the party. No phone call, no acknowledgement. Nothing. I told myself there had to be a mistake. Maybe the invite had been lost. Maybe they assumed I was on the road. So I drove to the venue, unannounced, needing to see for myself if it was true. I arrived just in time to see Amy, my little girl. At least, the girl I had thought of as my own, standing beside her fiancé, laughing with guests, glowing in the way only people who are truly happy do. I stayed in the shadows, watching, unseen, unwanted. And then I heard her say it. My father was a Marine. He passed away when I was a baby, but he was the best man I never got to meet. I hope he would have been proud of me today. I felt the words like a fist to the gut. It wasn't just that she had erased me. It wasn't just that I wasn't invited. It was that, in her mind, I had never been there at all. I left without saying a word. There was nothing left to say. For a long time, I had convinced myself that I could endure it. That as long as I stayed, as long as I kept trying, I could somehow carve out a place for myself in a family that had already decided I was nothing more than a shadow in their lives. But standing there outside Amy's engagement party, hearing her rewrite history as if I had never existed, something inside me hardened. I had spent years giving my time, my money, my love. I had built a home for them, supported them, made sure they never had to struggle. And for what? To be erased? To be discarded like an afterthought? No, not anymore. I wasn't a fool. I had spent my life on the road. And if there was one thing I had learned from watching people at every stop along the way, it was that trust was a fragile thing, and the people closest to you were the ones most capable of betrayal. So I started paying attention. Mia had always handled most of the household finances. At the time, I had seen it as a convenience, one less thing for me to worry about while I was on the road. But as I started digging, looking through statements and records she probably thought I never checked, I saw the truth. The accounts I had been pouring money into weren't just supporting our home. There were transactions that didn't add up, expenses I had never approved, accounts that led back to places I had never been. She had been siphoning money for years, moving it piece by piece into separate accounts, probably thinking that if I ever walked away, she would have enough stashed away to keep herself comfortable. But she had underestimated me. I had worked too hard for too long to let her take what was mine. I spent weeks preparing. I transferred money out of the shared accounts, shutting them down before she could notice. I closed credit cards in my name, removed her as an authorized user on everything that mattered. The house, the cars, even the small business I had invested in. Every document, every title, every deed was in my name alone. She had never thought to secure any of it for herself, too used to me providing, too confident that I would never think to pull the rug out from under her. And then, when everything was in place, I had the divorce papers drawn up. There would be no negotiations, no drawn-out battles. Everything she had been living off of belonged to me. She would walk away with nothing. For years, I had given without question, believing I was part of something real. But if I had never been family to them, then they were nothing to me now, and I was going to make sure they felt it. The morning of my departure, I left the 3 envelopes on the kitchen table, right where I knew Mia would find them. I didn't stick around to watch her reaction. There was no need. By the time she opened them, I would be long gone, and everything I had built, the life she had taken for granted, would be gone with me. The first envelope held the divorce papers, neatly prepared, legally binding, and undeniable. Along with them was a carefully compiled folder of evidence, financial records, proof of her unauthorized transfers, and documentation of her treatment of me over the years. It wasn't just a request for separation. It was a declaration of war, one she had no way of winning. The second envelope contained an official eviction notice. The house she had spent years treating as her own, the one she had assumed she would always have, was mine. Legally, financially, and in every other way that mattered. She had no claim to it, no rights, no ground to stand on. She and the kids, if they still considered themselves hers, had 30 days to leave, and there would be no extensions. The third envelope was the final blow. A statement of financial collapse. Every account she had relied on was gone. The credit cards she had used so freely were closed. The hidden funds she had thought she could fall back on had been drained before she even realized they were missing. The financial security she had taken for granted, the stability I had provided, was wiped away in a single stroke. For years, she had expected me to be the man who stayed, the man who provided, who accepted, who endured. She had assumed I would always be there, that I would never see what was right in front of me. But she was wrong. I had seen everything. And now, she was the one left standing in the ruins, forced to figure out how to rebuild from nothing. As I drove away, Guest curled up in the passenger seat beside me. I felt nothing but the weight of finality. I had given them everything, and they had shown me exactly how little I had ever meant to them. Now, they would learn what it meant to lose. Mia never saw it coming. She had spent years convinced that she held all the control, that she could rewrite history to suit her needs, that she could take and take without consequence. But life has a way of balancing the scales, and when everything came crashing down, she had no choice but to face the reality she had spent years ignoring. With no money, no home, and no legal claim to anything, she was forced to pack what little she could carry and move in with her brother. From what I heard, he wasn't exactly thrilled to have her there. He had his own family, his own responsibilities, and the last thing he wanted was to take in his sister, who had burned every bridge she had. There was no sympathy, no comfort, just an unspoken understanding that she had nowhere else to go. Liam, the boy who had once scoffed at me, who had turned his back on the man who had raised him, now found himself struggling in ways he had never imagined. He had always looked down on hard work, believing he was above it, believing that the world would simply hand him a comfortable life the way I once had. But without my financial support, without the cushion he had always relied on, reality hit him hard. He ended up working at a tire shop, a job that left his hands dirty and his body sore, a job he would have once sneered at. Now, he had no choice but to endure it. And then there was Amy, the girl who had erased me from her story, who had built her future on a foundation of lies, now had to face the consequences of her own deception. Her engagement fell apart almost as quickly as it had begun. Her fiancé's family had no interest in tying themselves to someone whose history was built on fraud, whose financial stability had vanished overnight, whose mother had been caught in a scandal of her own making. The wedding was canceled, the relationship severed, and the life she had planned slipped through her fingers. They had spent years pretending I was nothing. Now, they were forced to live without me, for real this time. No more security, no more stability, no more safety net. They had thrown me away, convinced they would never need me. But now, standing in the wreckage of the life they had so carelessly built, they finally understood what it meant to lose everything. And as for me, with my past finally behind me, I focused on what I should have been doing all along, building a life for myself, one that didn't include people who only saw me as a convenience. The weight I had been carrying for years was gone, and for the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. There was no one left to drain me, no obligations holding me back, no ungrateful hands reaching for what was mine. It was just me, the open road, and the freedom to live on my own terms. I expanded my business, turning what had once been a simple job into something bigger. I hired a few drivers, took on better contracts, and built something that was truly mine. It was work, but it was the kind of work I loved, the kind that let me decide my own future instead of handing it over to people who didn't deserve it. Not long after, I bought a new house, smaller than the one I had left behind, but built for the life I wanted. It was quiet, just outside the city, with plenty of space for Guest to roam. He had been by my side through everything, the only one who had never turned his back on me. He deserved to enjoy the life I was finally settling into. I made sure he had the best of everything, his own spot by the fireplace, a massive yard to run in, and a new orthopedic bed that he took to like it had been made just for him. And then, when I least expected it, I met someone new. She wasn't like Mia. She didn't treat me like a placeholder or diminish my work as if it were something to be ashamed of. She understood what it meant to build something with your own hands, to take pride in what you do. She listened when I talked, valued the life I had made for myself, and never once made me feel like I was something temporary. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing something that was never meant to be mine. I wasn't trying to prove my worth to people who would never appreciate it. I had found peace, and more importantly, I had found a future that was truly mine. And as I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Guest stretched out beside me, completely at ease, I realized something. I hadn't lost a family. I had simply freed myself from a burden I should have let go of a long time ago.